From tournaments and basements with reviewers to selling out some of the biggest stadiums in the world. In just a few decades, esports have swept the globe.
$1 billion last year alone.
Millions and millions of viewers and
Stewie's won the round! We're going to overtime!
But recently, something happened. The hype train is gone, and now all we hear in the media is that esports is dying.
I can't think of anything less interesting.
That it's ruined gaming, or that it's already dead.
Oh, I play video games. Oh, you dork.
But what if I told you that the media has got it all wrong? That esports isn't dying, and I can prove it with this man.
My name is Victor Goossens, and I'm the founder and co-CEO of TeamLiquid.
Now, Victor was kind enough to chat with me for this video, telling me about his story and how he got into esports and why he's still knee-deep 23 years later. And it's important to understand his story because Victor has been in the scene since the very beginning. He's been through all the ups and downs, and his career really began in 2000 with the creation of TeamLiquid and then TeamLiquid.net, a website to track the StarCraft pro scene in Korea.
I realized that there were very little sources for coverage of Korean professional StarCraft. And so I started TeamLiquid.net, which while it shares the name of the clan, it was actually really meant to cover professional StarCraft and mostly the games happening in Korea.
Now, Koreans and StarCraft esports are like Americans and apple pie. It is a cultural phenomenon that will live on forever. But the reason StarCraft became so popular was because in the late 90s, Korea was hit with a financial crisis, causing many to lose trust in the market and invest in PC bongs. These PC cafes were incredible for the new generation, and by 1998, there were thousands of PC bongs across the country, and practically every computer in these cafes had StarCraft. All of these factors created the perfect storm, giving rise to professional players, teams, tournaments, and not one but two dedicated TV channels for watching StarCraft. People all over the world paid attention to StarCraft in Korea, keeping up to date using Victor's website. So Victor, a passionate StarCraft player himself, left his home in the Netherlands to go compete in South Korea.
I moved to Korea to be a professional gamer for a while. I lived there for 6 months. It was honestly, some of the greatest time of my life. Played on television, participated in all sorts of tournaments. But eventually, sleeping on the floor, earning a couple $100 per month, I felt like, okay, it's time to move on and look for a different career because this cannot really last forever.
Although Victor had to move on after only 6 months, his passion for StarCraft didn't go away. He continued to support the community with his website while he went to university and played professional poker, growing his website and community slowly year after year.
A lot of StarCraft players moved from StarCraft to poker. With that switch, I could I was in control of my own life basically, and so I always maintained TeamLiquid.net and I always maintained TeamLiquid, kept putting time into it, kept working on it, and that small community side became really, really big over time.
Like Victor and TeamLiquid.net, esports was in this slow growth period during the 2000s. Although it was exploding across the ocean in Korea, watching people play video games professionally wasn't really popular yet in the West. The first problem was most scenes were decentralized, lacking very little organization or structure, usually because developers didn't have any monetary incentive to support the pro scene, since games at the time were only a one-time purchase. Some companies like Major League Gaming tried to give the scene some structure, but without a centralized broadcasting platform like there was in Korea, it was really difficult to build an audience. Twitch didn't exist yet, and YouTube was still in its infancy. The real issue with esports, however, was the culture. There wasn't an instant culture shift in most countries like there was in Korea. The whole country was playing or watching StarCraft with players being looked at as celebrities. Where programmers in other places were often looked down upon.
YouTube launched a new video network yesterday where you can watch other people play video games. For real, the whole network. It's called the We Should All Be Very Ashamed of Ourselves for Failing as Parents channel.
Made fun of by people in the news because they couldn't fathom someone playing video games for a living.
It's a game.
That's not a sport.
That's not a sport.
The 2000s were a testing ground for esports. Companies and players were doing everything they could to make some money playing the games they loved. And although people were passionate about esports, they constantly failed during this time to make anything stick. But this failure by companies and players alike carved a path for competitive gaming to see a new dawn in 2010. setting the stage for what would become the first legit decade of organized esports. And it all started with 2 games, StarCraft 2 and League of Legends. As I explained in my League video, Riot knew organized competition was critical for League's long-term success, which is why they invested in their competitive scene so early on. Nowadays, we look at League as this example to emulate. But originally, StarCraft 2 was the esports poster child. So with the rise of StarCraft 2, TeamLiquid was officially born, with many others following suit, teams like CLG, Cloud9, 100 Thieves, and many others. Now there were established teams, sponsors, and publisher-backed tournaments. Tournaments like StarCraft 2 and League of Legends World Championships, both featuring massive prize pools for the time. These tournaments would grow bigger and bigger by the year, and by 2015, we had tournaments selling out Madison Square Garden.
When I walked into Madison Square Garden in 2015 for TSM versus CLG, and I looked at the crowd, 18,000 seats, totally full. Every ticket sold out in 3 minutes. The booming, the sound, the environment, that was a certain feeling. And I was like, this is awesome.
That's Devin Nash, former CEO of CLG and current founder of Novo. Okay, really awesome guy, and you can hear just how hype esports were at the time. And because all of this excitement, the media started changing their narrative. These professional video game players weren't so odd anymore. They were actually looking kind of cool. And the media weren't the only ones who took notice. Investors were paying attention too. Up until 2017, esports growth looked like this. A nice upward trend, nothing crazy from a money standpoint, but definitely some attractive growth. But when investors saw that line going up and up, they saw potential. An emerging industry ripe for the picking. So investors did what they always do. They pumped esports full of money and created a bubble. Just for context on how much money got poured into the market, this was the amount in 2017. And this was 2018. Billions and billions of dollars were just thrown around and people kept investing. Because that same year, Riot changed League of Legends esports to a franchise model following the creation of the Overwatch League. Instead of teams competing in qualifiers to win a spot in a tournament, the game developers charged a franchise fee to compete, usually to the tune of millions of dollars per slot. Investors loved this because franchise slots have tangible value and they're familiar with the model. This is exactly what the NBA does. Franchising helps establish brands and build fan loyalty because you are more likely to watch a team that you know. So franchising combined with rapid growth of esports made investors think that they were onto something big, possibly the next NBA. The investment cycle continued and more money came in, expanding that esports bubble. The media loved every minute of it, boasting tournament winning, sold out crowds, and huge investments. Here we find Victor in TeamLiquid again. The company had merged with Curse Esports, they had taken some investment and were growing rapidly.
And so with that support, we were allowed to build TeamLiquid in some of the most important time in esport, expand into additional games again.
Everything was looking good for TeamLiquid in the world of esports. But then in early 2020, the pandemic happened.
Fast-breaking developments in the coronavirus.
Coronavirus is also hitting esports.
At first, this massively disrupted everybody's plans. Events were canceled, stadiums sat empty, and sponsors were nervous. But there were some upsides. No one was traveling, so most people were isolating, and to fill up this free time, people watched more competitive gaming. The viewership saw big peaks, and viewing hours on Twitch reached insane heights. I personally remember watching all sorts of events, including the monthly Coinbox, which is a Smash online tournament supported by TeamLiquid and sponsored by Coinbase. This is also when crypto and NFTs started to explode, and we see some of the biggest gaming sponsors ever. Companies like Coinbase, Uniswap, and FTX. Esports looked like this cash cow of the future. And for the first time in history, an esports team went public.
We're celebrating FaZe Clan's listing as a publicly traded company.
When FaZe Clan's stock debuted, they sat at $19 per share, which valued FaZe at over $1 billion. It was crazy. People were excited. Snoop Dogg was excited. From an outsider looking in, esports looked like this rocket heading towards the moon. Then problems started to appear. Once the pandemic ended, viewership went down. People could now leave their homes and do other hobbies again. Then crypto and NFT companies started to fail and sponsor money started drying up. FaZe, the shiny example for esports teams, had their shares plummet to less than $1, and they might soon be delisted from the NASDAQ. The Overwatch League, the esport that was meant to be the standard of all leagues going forward, closed its doors, screwing a ton of people on the way down. And lastly, the cherry on top of all of this chaos, many investors pulled out. Those that pumped esports full of cash just left the scene. What was once the golden goose was now the ugly duckling, and the media just piled on.
The global nature of esports is also its downfall.
Cutbacks and closures and layoffs.
Article after article, video after video just bashed esports. What was once a passionate esports community selling out stadiums had now become jaded, with viewership on the decline. Less and less people watched events, and it's because we lost the story.
Everything got lost in the story. If you know what I'm talking about, maybe you can leave a comment about it, but the passion's gone. I don't care anymore. I watch the LCS and it's so boring. I don't know anything that's going on. I don't care about the players or their story because no one's ever told me why I should. There's just nothing going on. It's so boring. It's reflected in the viewership that's declining year over year.
The reason why we love competitive gaming is the same reason we love sports, racing, the Olympics, even hot dog eating competitions. We want to see the humanity or inhumanity, the rise of a player, the skills, the rivalry, the brotherhood. It's the reason a semifinals league tournament sold out Madison Square Garden in 3 minutes, and why the LCS is struggling now. Were the 2015 LCS players better? I doubt it, but the stories were so much better, or at least they were told better.
I don't think that the teams or the publishers have made sufficient effort to really tell the stories of these players, and to some extent telling those stories is impossible because the publishers drove the teams to dog eat dog, basically play as hard as you can, and if you don't, you're relegated. You get kicked out of the league.
Stories and personal experiences are why I'm an SSG Halo fan. I went to a Halo tournament with some buddies hosted by Space Station Gaming, and they showed how one of their players rose from a no-name kid playing in the basement to one of the best in the world. It personalized this experience, and it made me want to root for him. Not to mention, the energy in that place was palpable. Stories are also why I now root for TeamLiquid, because I like Victor. I like his history, how he rose from a 17-year-old kid playing StarCraft in his basement to playing professionally in Korea to the CEO of one of the biggest esports teams in the world. It creates this connection for me, tying me to the organization. But the problem is, even though I'm an SSG fan and TeamLiquid fan, most people don't care about teams. They only care about the players involved. As Devin puts it,
no matter what you do in an esports team, you're one step removing the viewer from the influencer themselves.
Sure.
By adding a brand on top of it and then saying to that person, care about this brand.
Sure.
So let's look at like CLG. If I have Doublelift on my team, it's like a really prominent League of Legends influencer, right? Why should the person stop me, the brand, CLG, and not just go straight into Doublelift, support them, subscribe to them, buy their merch, do that kind of thing?
So when a prominent player like Doublelift or Faker leaves one team for another, the fans leave with him. This will always exist in sports. When Messi went to Inter Miami, their fan base exploded. But what's different about Miami compared to esports teams, when Messi leaves or retires, Miami will always have a loyal fan base because people in Florida who like soccer will root for their local team. Not to mention, the team itself is part of a much larger MLS organization. So connections and associations to things outside of players are critical to the long-term success, which is also why content creators like Disguised Toast, Charlie, and Ludwig are all breaking into the scene. They have these huge fan bases that care about them, which extends to their teams. But connection isn't the primary problem with esports. Lack of stories isn't the reason investors pulled out or why so many teams are failing. Esports is struggling because it isn't profitable.
You don't know, pretty much every single esports organization is vastly overvalued because they're all subsidized by venture capitalist groups that are probably going to get fed up in 3 to 5 years when none of them are profitable.
Now, esports not being profitable is an open secret in the industry.
If you're in this for the money, esports is a terrible side project, I would argue.
Some organizations like TSM claim profitability, but most teams openly admit they are burning cash.
So you just burn the money like this? Just like that, that's looking good.
Even Victor and TeamLiquid aren't profitable, with Victor stating in his interview,
Yeah, so this year is not quite over, but at least at Liquid we can confidently say that we are either break even or very close to break even in 2023.
Which is why most teams aren't really focused on esports, but on other revenue sources, things like apparel, content creation, and sponsors. Any team focused on just making money off competitions and events is either paying their players way below market rate, or they're surviving off outside investment. This is so backward from traditional sports, where the majority of money for teams comes from the events, specifically team sales and broadcasting. But esports teams are the opposite, with most of the revenue coming from sponsorships and merchandise. But the problem with using your team as a brand to sell something is that you need to create connections with your audience for them to want to buy. And it's so much harder to do that as a team than it is to do as a player. So the current esports model isn't sustainable. At least it isn't unless we want teams to become multimedia companies, which could be fine, but most of the time companies go where the money is, and I worry that as these teams grow their media brands, esports will take a back seat. So teams need to find a way to be profitable on their own within esports without having to depend on other revenue sources to survive. But to do that, 4 things need to happen. First, they need to do better storytelling. Teams need to tell their players' stories better, but they also need to tell their own story. Be more like Victor or Charlie or Disguised Toast. Make me care about your team. Get someone or multiple people to be the face. Someone who won't leave in 2 years for another company. Which brings me to number 2. Publishers need to share more. Publishers like Riot, Valve, and Blizzard claim esports isn't profitable, which is true if you only look at the numbers, but if you were to look at the bigger picture, esports is extremely profitable for publishers who do it correctly. Think of esports as a marketing arm for publishers. Similar to teams, something to build brand and in-game market value. Not something that generates a profit on its own, but a loss leader that drives billions of dollars in transactions within the in-game marketplaces. So the real value right now within esports is skins. But most publishers don't want to share the money they make off skins, since that's their primary revenue source. So they give teams some scraps while they hoard the rest. At least most have until recently. Riot is actually trying something new with Valorant. They removed the multi-million-dollar license fee, and teams are also receiving 50% of the revenue from skin bundles. Something League teams have been asking for years. So there's a shift happening in the market that may lead to future growth and more sustainable revenue streams for teams. But that's not going to solve the problem by itself. Teams also need to cut costs, specifically player salaries, which is number 3. Now, I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for saying that, but million-plus yearly salaries made sense when teams had millions to spend thanks to investment. But the esports market didn't grow as expected, and the money is no longer there. So the salaries need to level out to something reasonable, with the goal of finding a path to profitability so salaries can jump way past $1 million. It's like the NFL. A family member of mine played for the New York Jets in the 60s and actually won the 3rd Super Bowl. He was a defensive starter with incredible stats, but he made very little and became a high school history teacher because the NFL didn't have the money like they have now, with some salaries sitting in the hundreds of millions. It's crazy, right? But this is what happens when the market matures. Which brings me to the 4th and final problem, broadcasting. As I explained in a previous video, monetization of broadcasting was limited in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, predominantly because viewers didn't pay for TV channels. They just bought an antenna, and that was it. But with the introduction of cable and satellite TV, the amount of money in television increased dramatically. These and a variety of other factors are why the NFL has so much money to throw around. They learned how to monetize their events, which is why the NFL is currently being valued at $160 billion. Now, are traditional sports and esports the same? Not at all. Traditional sports don't have the problem esports have, which is the game is owned by someone. Riot owns League of Legends and the rights to its broadcast. Imagine if the NFL owned every football and football field, and if you wanted to broadcast your high school game, you had to pay the NFL or get its permission. This impedes organic growth and is why the Super Smash competitive scene isn't 5 times bigger than it is. Nintendo scares all the money away.
But why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
It's why StarCraft in Korea was so successful. Blizzard wasn't involved and the scene was allowed to grow organically with its own teams, TV channels, and more, without publishers screwing it up. Now, that's my own opinion. Many people believe having the publisher involved in an esports scene is better for it, and there are arguments for that. But whatever you believe, the industry as a whole needs to figure out how to monetize broadcasting to be successful. Even extreme examples like what Ovi and I talked about.
The other aspect of monetization is, I think we need the equivalent of like microtransactions we need some new model other than just advertising and broadcast rights. Giving people some sort of way, giving fans the ability to affect the broadcast or affect their experience of the broadcast in some way by paying money seems to me like a no-brainer.
Now, will all these ideas work? No. But we need to start thinking about the future like Ovi and learn how esports can survive and thrive. We should be treating this time like the 2000s, testing new ideas to see what works and what doesn't. Like any market, esports has plenty of issues that need to be addressed and overcome. But the key word here is overcome. Yes, competitive gaming didn't blow up as people expected during the investment bubble, but that doesn't mean it's failing. Esports is in its adolescence. It's growing. And like the NFL, it will take time to mature. I strongly believe people like Victor who stay passionate, who grow with the market and keep iterating will turn esports into something bigger than the NFL or NBA. Esports are just so accessible and global. Ignore the media. They focus on the short term and the now. They bash esports in the past, and pretty soon, they'll be praising it again. Oftentimes, I fall into this trap myself, letting my emotions in the moment dictate what I say versus researching the answer and thinking about the future. It's the human in us to think negatively. But I believe esports has just hit a stumbling block, and like any stumbling block, it can be turned into a stepping stone to lift you to something greater. Be like Victor and believe in the future. Esports is not dying. It's just begun.
Look, I know the current time in esports is definitely not easy, and a lot of people, companies, but people as well, are feeling some pain and have some negative experience around that. There are no fundamental issues with esports. There are revenues in esports that are real. It is just about like building an appropriately sized business according to those things. And it's a little bit of a tough time right now when businesses have been built based on investment, and you just simply cannot just scale that back overnight and recalibrate your business so easily. And yeah, that is causing definitely some struggles, some friction that is real. Passion for gaming, passion for esports, viewership for esports, these things are all real. And if those things are real, eventually like a sport will be built upon it that is sustainable. We believe in that. We will continue to strive for that. And yeah, we are definitely here to stay.
Esports is something I've been passionate about for a while, which is why the second video I ever made is about Nintendo's hatred for the Super Smash competitive scene. So if you want a deeper look at the insane world of Nintendo's esports, click here to watch it. But Going Indie exists to explore the business of video games and hopefully help people better understand what makes games successful. If you like what we do, subscribe to be notified when we post our next video. Thanks everyone, and we'll see you next time.